Gen 1 is famous for being the glitchiest game in the franchise. The games were made by a very small team, so it's not all that surprising, but it leads to games where you can do some really ridiculous stuff. These glitches ended up having some pretty big impacts on the game, especially on the Pokemon themselves. Lots of strange things would happen to your Pokemon or in a battle in the right circumstances, and today we're going to go over some of the weirdest and most interesting glitches that can happen to your Pokemon. And starting us off at number 10, we have the Focus Energy glitch. This is a pretty famous glitch and one that you don't have to do much work to accomplish. In fact, you basically don't have to do any work because the glitch is that the move just doesn't work. Focus Energy is a status move that's supposed to raise your crit stat. However, rather famously, due to a coding error, instead of making crits happen 4 times as often, it makes them 4 times as rare because someone accidentally divided a number when they were supposed to multiply it. Essentially, Focus Energy just debuffs your Pokemon when you use it. Somehow, this isn't the only move in Gen 1 that essentially just doesn't work, with a couple of other moves just not functioning as intended. Hitmonlee's signature moves are Jump Kick and High Jump Kick. Strong fighting type moves with the downside, where if they miss, you take 1/8 of the damage they would have dealt as recoil damage. However, instead of doing that, they just deal 1 damage as recoil. For some reason, these glitches also persist in Pokemon Stadium, which fixed a lot of other glitches in Gen 1's battle system. Now, these 2 glitches, especially the Focus Energy glitch, are pretty famous. So well known in fact that in some circumstances they would have been excluded from this list, so we can talk about some more niche and interesting topics. But we couldn't do that for this list. The thing is, these glitches are so egregious and basic, it's kind of hard to believe they made it into the final version of the game. These are the games that spawned the largest media franchise in the world, and the fact that they feature several moves that literally don't do what they're supposed to is pretty hard to ignore. While they're not the most in-depth glitches in the game, they're so blatant and easy to accomplish that they've probably actually affected more people's playthroughs than any other glitch. And at number 9, we have skipping the Marowak encounter in the Pokemon Tower. Now, normally to proceed through the game, you have to go to the top of the Pokemon Tower to get the Pokeflute, which allows you to wake the Snorlaxes and proceed through Kanto. However, before you can do that, you have to get the Slipscope from Slipco so that you can see Ghost properly, which will then allow you to complete the quest and encounter the Ghost Marowak properly. All of this together leads to quite the adventure that takes up quite a bit of the player's time, but it turns out you don't have to deal with any of this. All you technically have to do to get the Pokeflute is just to get past the Ghost Marowak and then talk to Mr. Fuji. Fortunately for anyone wanting to get through the game more quickly, there's a small glitch that allows us to skip all these steps. You see, while you normally can't do much to the Ghost in Pokemon Tower without the Slipscope, thanks to what was most likely an oversight, you can still use a Pokédoll against Marowak to successfully flee the battle. Normally, this wouldn't do all that much for us, as escaping a battle rarely allows us to progress the story. However, since this is a wild Pokemon battle as opposed to a trainer battle, when you flee with the Pokédoll, the Ghost Marowak will disappear and allow you to complete the quest. Essentially, you can skip over the entirety of the Slipco section of the game with a random, easily accessible item. This is another glitch where it's almost impressive how easy it is to pull off. There's no complicated setup or weird series of instructions to follow. You just use an item in a certain battle and it completely bypasses a major chunk of the game. It almost makes you wonder why this isn't a more well-known glitch. But that's probably because most people never use Pokédolls and don't experiment much with the item. Either way, if you're playing through the OG Red and Blue at some point and you don't feel like going through Slipco, you have another option for how to approach your gameplay. And at number 8, we have teaching Charizard Fly. Now, rather famously in the original Pokemon Red and Blue, Charizard could not learn the move Fly. This is weird for a number of reasons. For one, starting in Gen 2 onwards, Charizard can always learn Fly. It's only in Red and Blue that it can't learn the move. This is a bit silly, as Charizard is a flying type and clearly has the ability to fly as well. You may think, well, maybe they just didn't want the player to use their starters for HMs, so they didn't give them an HM move, which is about the only variable that could explain this decision, but it also decidedly is not the reason why this choice was made. Not only can Blastoise learn Surf, but Venusaur and Charizard can also learn Cut. So giving the starters HMs wasn't the problem. It seems like mostly an oversight. In fact, it seems that Game Freak agreed because in Yellow version, you actually can teach Charizard Fly. Now, this isn't a glitch, of course, but because of how the game handled trading Pokemon between not only Red and Blue, but also between the Yellow version, unlike games in the current generation that will overwrite moves that a Pokemon can't learn in that specific game with ones that they can, if you successfully transfer a Pokemon with a move from Yellow to the older games, they'll keep that move. This almost never matters. as the learn sets for most moves remains the exact same from red and blue to yellow with minor adjustments, such as the exact level that a Pokemon learns a new move and the like. This is one of the most famous and frustrating examples of these updates, and it's frustrating simply because allowing Charizard to learn Fly in red and blue would have seriously helped out a lot of players. In Pokemon Yellow, when you're forced to use Pikachu as your starter, letting the other starters get access to HMs isn't quite as relevant. At the very least, you can still get Charmander pretty early into the game if you really want to. Now, while learning that a lot of Pokemon in Gen 1 had access to new moves in the most roundabout way possible is interesting, there is one Pokemon whose moveset is so baffling that it needs its own spot on this list to explain. And at number 7, we have Kinesis not being included in Kadabra's learn set. Now, there's a good chance you don't know what this move is, mainly because it's terrible, but Kinesis is Alakazam's line signature move. It's a Psychic-type move with 80% accuracy, which lowers your opponent's accuracy by 1 stage. This means that it's literally just a worse sand attack, which has the same effect but can't miss in Gen 1 outside of the 1 in 256 glitch. Just as an aside, every move besides Swift has a 1 in 256 chance to miss thanks to a coding error. Anyway, the point is that Kinesis is a terrible move that only Kadabra and Alakazam can learn. Or at least, it's a terrible move that they were supposed to learn. You see, for some reason in red and blue, Kadabra didn't learn Kinesis by level up. However, the move was still in the game. The move Metronome, which simply calls another random move in the game, can still call Kinesis and use the move, despite the fact that you can't actually learn it on any Pokemon. This was fixed in Yellow version, but in a bit of a roundabout way. Kadabra was programmed to learn the move at level 0, which means that a wild Kadabra would have the move as long as they weren't high enough level to have learned 4 other moves. However, they won't learn the move upon evolving. So, to get a Kadabra or Alakazam with a move, the only way to do so is to find a Kadabra on Route 8 that already knows the move and catch it, only available in Yellow version. You can then transfer it into red and blue and it will keep the move, not that it's going to help you much. Overall, this is one of the strangest blunders in Gen 1. It's a pretty simple mistake, but the fact that a Pokemon's signature move was just unobtainable and required a ton of extra work to get it, and it's one of the worst signature moves ever put into the game, is just hilarious. And at number 6, we have Paralysis and Burn stat glitches. Now, if you don't know, the statuses of Paralysis and Burn don't just have their more visible effects of preventing you from moving or dealing damage at the end of the turn. In addition to these effects, Paralysis will also lower your speed to a quarter of what it is normally, and Burn will have a Pokemon's physical attack. Now, in most generations, this stat modifier works the way you think it does. No matter what other stat modifiers are applied, at the end of the day, the status would apply the same modification. So, even if you would have doubled your attack with a stat boosting move, if you're burned, it would still get halved again, meaning that your effective stat would just be whatever your original attack stat was, thanks to doubling and then halving it. However, due to another oversight in the code of Gen 1, the stats weren't calculated this way. For some reason, if you were burned or paralyzed and then used a move like Swords Dance or Agility to boost your speed or attack, your stats wouldn't go to what you think. Instead of just doubling your stat, which is then halved or quartered by the status, the game would first reset your stats to normal, getting rid of the stat drop from the status, and then boost that stat. So if you use Agility or Swords Dance with one of these statuses, your stat would go to what it would be if you were healthy and had used the move, which is not at all how it works in future gens, or how most people would assume it would work. However, that's not where this ends. If your opponent uses a stat-changing move, then the stat drop from the status will be reapplied, even if it's already applying properly. This means that if you've burned your opponent, you can have their attack again by using a move like Agility, which is one of the weirdest exploits in the game. While not completely game-breaking, this is one of the most obvious examples of Gen 1 battle mechanics just not doing what they're supposed to, and being exploitable as a result. And at number 5, we have the Toxic plus Leech Seed glitch. Before we can explain what went wrong here, let's go over what these moves do. Leech Seed is a grass-type move with 90% accuracy. When it hits, it gives your opponent the seeded status until they switch out. At the end of each turn, this seeded opponent will lose 1/8 of their HP, and you will gain that much HP. Toxic is a poison-type move with 85% accuracy that badly poisons the target. Badly Poison, for the unaware, is a more severe version of poison. At the end of each turn, they lose 1/16 of their total HP. However, every turn, it will increase the damage it deals by 1/16 of their HP. So, on the first turn, it will deal 1/16 damage, then 2/16, then 3/16, and so on and so on. The glitch occurs when an opponent is inflicted with both of these statuses. For some reason, both of these statuses use the exact same damage formula to calculate their damage. Rather than write a new damage formula for Leech Seed, they copied the toxic formula and simply made it so that one variable in the equation would never increase. However, if toxic is active, then the damage formula will go ahead and increment anyway, leading Leech Seed to do more and more damage every single turn. This can lead to the status doing a ton of damage fast, being able to KO a fully healthy Pokemon in 4 turns if both statuses are left unchecked. Now, this isn't actually all that useful, as in a real battle, your opponent can just switch out and the counter will be reset. But against the trainers in battle, you can just land both of these moves on them and let their HP drop without you ever needing to use any more attacks. This is a glitch that's surprisingly easy to perform, but really easy to miss given that most players won't see the need for 2 separate damage over time moves on the same Pokemon. And at number 4, we have the Dig/Fly glitch. Both of these moves are 2-turn charge moves. However, unlike moves like Solar Beam and the like, the first turn they charge, you can't be hit by any moves with the sole exception of Swift, because that move never misses. This is pretty standard for moves, even in the modern day. However, there is a peculiar glitch where you can get your Pokemon stuck into the semi-invulnerable state for the rest of the game. If your Pokemon is paralyzed and you use Dig or Fly, and on the turn the attack would hit, you get fully paralyzed, your Pokemon will not return to their normal state. Instead, they will get stuck in their flying or digging state even after the turn they're supposed to attack. However, the game thinks that you've completed using the move, so you're free to select a different attack on your next turn. Essentially, you're just stuck in the digging or flying state without any of the downsides. Even better, the game won't force you out of the state until you either switch out or use Dig or Fly again. This means that if you can trigger this state, you can stay in it and attack your opponent until you win the battle, which is pretty broken. This is why the moves are banned in Smog's Gen 1 competitive scene. Not only is it not competitive, but to my knowledge, the glitch isn't implemented into the simulator, and they're not going to go through the effort of programming the glitch back in when the glitch would likely get the moves banned anyway. This is also a glitch that would kind of happen a lot were you to use the moves in Gen 1 competitive. Body Slam is absolutely everywhere, and often players will rely on it to paralyze your opponent's Pokemon because Paralysis is a very powerful status in the competitive scene. While these moves are quite bad, if they're allowed, people would try and abuse it on Pokemon that could spare the slot, so banning the moves is pretty necessary. While not the most game-breaking glitch ever, these are one of the few really out there glitches that ended up having a big impact on competitive, so it's hard to not give it a high spot on this list. And at number 3 on this list, we have the No Evolution Stone Evolutions. Now, as you know, Pokemon like Eevee require a certain evolution stone to evolve. However, this entire process can actually be skipped with the right setup. You see, the game actually uses the same bit of its memory to check if an item has been used on a Pokemon as it does to see if a Pokemon is in a battle. So, with the right set of steps, you can actually trick the game into thinking you've used an evolution stone without needing to use one. Every evolution stone corresponds to a specific Pokemon, so you'll need to track them down if you want to do this glitch. Executor corresponds to the Moonstone, Psyduck corresponds to the Leaf Stone, Growlithe the Thunderstone, and Onix the Water Stone. Once you obtain the Pokemon you want to evolve and the right Pokemon for the stone you need, you'll need to get into a trainer battle. You'll use the Pokemon you want to evolve and make sure it gains enough experience to level up. After it does, switch it out for the Evolution Stone Pokemon you brought with you. Then finish the battle with it. This will cause the game to get confused about what actually happened during the battle, and it will think that you've used an evolution stone thanks to the aforementioned memory issue. And with that, you have a fully evolved Pokemon without needing to go track down another evolution stone. Now, while this is cool, it's really not all that useful. The Thunder, Water, and Leaf Stones can all be bought from Celadon City Store, and while the Moonstone is in limited quantity, there are only 4 lines that evolve with the Moonstone in Gen 1, and 2 of those are basically the same Pokemon. The only time this glitch will really be useful is maybe saving you some time while trying to complete your Pokedex, if that's something you want to do. Still, the fact that you can do this at all is one of the weirdest things about Gen 1. And at number 2, we have the level rollback glitch. This glitch requires you to have a level 1 Pokemon, something that is normally not possible within the game. In order to get a level 1 Pokemon, you're gonna have to do some other glitches first. There are a lot of similar ways to make this happen, but we'll stick with a simple one to get a level 100 Nidoking in Pokemon Yellow version specifically. To do this glitch, we'll need an escape rope. You head into Viridian Forest and walk to the specific portion of the map, then step to the left and open your menu. This will let you walk in front of a trainer and open your menu at the same time. We use our escape rope to teleport away right as this trainer tries to battle us. We go from the Pokemon Center back to the Viridian Forest and continue finding random Pokemon until we find specifically a level 4 Caterpie. Then we use Growl 6 times on it to lower its attack as much as you can, then knock it out. Then we'll head back up to Pewtered City and try to leave before defeating Brock. This will prompt the game to lead us back to the gym, which also triggers a few important lines of code for this glitch. If you head back to Viridian Forest after this, the game will get very confused and place you into a battle with a wild Nidoking. To explain what's going on here, we essentially confuse the game as to what even should be happening here by triggering and canceling a trainer battle with the escape rope. Then setting an arbitrary value by messing with the Caterpie's attack stat before re-triggering the trainer battle from earlier. This allows you to, with the right setup, forcibly spawn in almost any Pokemon you want, including the elusive Mew. However, this Nidoking will only be level 1, which isn't that amazing. Thankfully, there's another glitch we can exploit to get him into fighting shape. Since the game isn't programmed to deal with Pokemon below a certain level, it kind of bugs out when we spawn in a Pokemon this way at level 1 or 2. If we then level up by giving it less than 50 EXP, usually by using it at another Pokemon in that battle, the game will mess up calculating the amount of EXP we have, and we'll just assume we have a ton of it, instantly putting the Pokemon at level 100. There's a ton of uses for this glitch if you have enough time to mess around with escape ropes, random trainers, and re-triggering the correct lines of code. But with all of this power comes a lot of danger as well. This glitch, known as the Mew glitch or the Trainer Fly glitch, can potentially corrupt game files or even entire cartridges if done improperly. And this can spread to other games via link cables if you try to trade or battle with these glitch Pokemon. Still, it's such a famous glitch that we had to mention it, though there is another Pokemon related glitch that's somehow even more well known. And finally, at number 1, we have the MissingNo glitch. This is, of course, one of the most famous glitches, not only in Pokemon, but maybe in all of gaming. The method of triggering this glitch is pretty simple, though we should warn that this is another glitch that could potentially be hazardous to your game depending on what you find. In order to perform the glitch, you need to talk to the old man in Viridian City and go through his tutorial. Then you fly to Cinnabar Island and surf on the east coast of the island. Unless you get a bit unlucky with what your trainer name is, you'll eventually find the glitch Pokemon MissingNo and be allowed to catch it. This also has this same side effect of setting the quantity of the 6th item in your bag to 128, which the game isn't really built for, so this also glitches out a bit in terms of UI. This can be used to get a ton of rare candies if you want to get a lot of free level 100s, if you're feeling up to it. Now, this glitch has been talked about to death, appearing as a reference in a ton of Pokemon games and media. However, the glitch has a bit more to it than a lot of people remember. Not only does the red and blue version have the bird type, which doesn't appear anywhere else in the game, but the yellow version of the glitch gives you Pokemon that's dual normal and a random glitch type. These glitch types are identical to the normal type in how they interact, though it's not the same technically, so you won't get any extra same type attack boost when you use a normal type attack or anything. MissingNo stats are also really weird, as it has a defense stat of 0, yes, literally 0, and a special of 6. Oh, and it also has 136 attack, which would be pretty useful if you could actually use it. Now, while MissingNo is the most famous glitch Pokemon, there are actually a ton of glitch Pokemon in the game. They're just the result of random code being spliced together, and while MissingNo is the one that's probably easiest to encounter and the most famous, there are a ton of other glitch Pokemon you can find. Some of them require doing the Trainer Fly glitch mentioned in the previous section, but with a Pokemon with a different special stat, and others require using another glitch called the Time Capsule exploit. We could spend an entire video just going over all of the glitch Pokemon in the game, as they are pretty silly, but that's a hair too far for this video. MissingNo kind of had to be the number 1 spot on this list, considering how famous it is. But it's also the glitch that has the biggest implications on what you could do in the game if you actually do perform it. With all that in mind, there's really no reason it wouldn't take the top spot on this list.